Hey guys, Sebastian here from MobiFlight. Today we have another video tutorial that is provided by Roffler, who is a great guy on our Discord server and MobiFlight community member. And well, there's not so much to say other than check the video out yourself and learn some cool stuff about MobiFlight and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020.
Hello and welcome everyone interested in learning something about the A320 fly-by-wire mod and how to display on a 7-segment display the managed and selected modes, meaning the dashes and the actual autopilot value. My name is Roffler from the MobiFlight community Discord server, and we're going to take a look at the prerequisites, so what tools we need to achieve our solution. We'll talk about the logic behind it, talk different setups, meaning 1 and 2 button setups, and finally some testings. A short disclaimer before we start: the information provided in this video is based on my personal findings, on my personal workflow. So if you find a better way to do things or to achieve things, please share it with the community. Credit for this goes out to Oscar Ergül. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. He guided me through the entire process, and my task, so to speak, is now to show everyone else how to achieve this. So thank you again, Özgür. And if you find something out useful for the community, please share it with us as well. So onto the prerequisites. What do we need? We need Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, naturally. We need MobiFlight, and most importantly, we need FSU IPC7. So onto the problem. Based on our situation, I have divided that into 3 different sections: the physical, real-life section, so to speak, so with your physical button, the MobiFlight section, and the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 section. So whenever we are in one of these sections, something is happening inside this section. So on the right side, so when we want to toggle or change something inside the simulator from outside, this will go something like this. So the user is pressing a button, a signal will be sent to MobiFlight. MobiFlight uses this signal and transforms it, so to speak, to a value. For example, the value 2 or the parameter 2 of the event ID 68066, which means we will have managed speed mode in our simulator, in our fly-by-wire mod. The issue is now that we need to read what state is currently active inside the simulator. So we need to find out if the parameter of 68066 is either 2 or 1, so either managed or selected. The problem is that we are not able to read this parameter, or actually the entire value. So we also cannot transform this value, and we cannot set a precondition, meaning we are not able to display on our 7-segment displays the actual value or the dashed mode, or also managed mode. So what is the solution then? Same principle applies here. Onto the right side we have a physical button. When we press it, a signal goes to MobiFlight, same as before. But now we set our own FSU IPC offset and use this as our main hub, so to speak. So whenever you press this button, it will start with 0. So whenever you press this button, it will toggle between 1 and 0. How to do that, we'll show that, or I'll show you that in a second. So we have now our own FSU IPC offset, which toggles between 0 and 1. And this is, once again, our hub for everything else. So based on that value, we now can achieve to send a value from MobiFlight to the simulator based on the state of this FSU IPC offset. So if this offset is 0, then we will set the event ID 680666 to 2. Otherwise, we will set the event ID 68066 to 1. As we start our simulator in a cold and dark situation, or also in on the runway, our autopilot will be by default in managed mode. So whenever we start FSU IPC and whenever we start MobiFlight, we can say that 0 is managed and 1 is selected for our own FSU IPC offset. So keep that in mind for a second. Okay, so back onto our road. So we sent a value to the simulator, and based on our precondition, we can now select either, or we can set either selected or managed mode inside the simulator. So because we cannot read from the simulator, we can read from MobiFlight. That's why we use our own FSU IPC offset. So whenever our own FSU IPC offset is set to 1, means whenever we are in selected mode, then display the FSU IPC offset 07E2, which correlates to the autopilot value. And whenever the FSU IPC, our own FSU IPC offset is set to 0, compare it, and if the current value is set to 0, write dashes inside that. So display the managed mode, so to speak. And from that, we can come into the real world and into the real life physical environment and display based on our FSU IPC offset, our own FSU IPC offset, the value or the 3 dashes or more dashes based on our state. So that's the theory behind it. So let's go on to the setup. So we have basically 2 kinds of setup. The first setup is a 1-button setup, meaning you have an encoder with a push button included. So you can either turn left or right and push the encoder. This is then for users who have not implemented the pull mechanism. So there is no pull function with that. So this method can be applied with 1 button as well. And the 2-button setup is for people who have implemented the push and pull mechanism. So we will toggle our own FSU IPC offset with 2 different buttons. And for the 1-button setup, we'll toggle our own FSU IPC offset with only 1 button. So onto the 1-button setup with MobiFlight and inside the simulator. Okay, so inside the simulator, we will now program MobiFlight to use 1 button to change and toggle between the 2 states managed and selected. And for that, we will set up our output. This will be our main hub, so to speak, for the selected and managed speeds. And we will just call it speed toggle offset. So we'll activate that, and we use for our case the free offset 5300. So inside FSU IPC we have a range of free offsets, and 5300 is one of them. So we can use that. Click OK. And whenever we click run now, we will see that our FSU IPC offset is set to 0, which is also correct and works for our case. As you can see inside the simulator, all modes in the FCU, they are currently set to the managed mode, meaning our principle still applies. So whenever our own FSU IPC offset is 0, is set to 0, then our mode inside in the simulator is also set to managed. To check if we really did something wrong or if everything worked out, we need to tell the aircraft where we are. In our case, I'm currently in Cologne, so I will insert that into the MCDU to initialize the aircraft position. So we can actually see when the mode is changing from managed to selected and back to managed. Okay, going back to MobiFlight, we will now program our input, our one button to toggle between managed and selected for the FSU IPC offset, and we will call this button speed toggle offset, because this is the sole purpose of this config line here is to toggle between 0 and 1 in our pre-offset. So I will pick my button I want to use, and I want to use the FCU push speed because the setup might be the one relevant for you, and we want to change the FSU IPC offset 5300. We'll leave the size in bytes on 1 because we only need 0 or 1, and we want to toggle between 0 and 1, and how to achieve that is with an if statement. So we will write if the current value equals to 0, toggle it to 1, otherwise leave it on 0, and we'll close up this if statement. Through that, whenever we push this button or this, whenever we push the speed encoder, we will toggle our created offset here between 0 and 1. So we can hit run and test it real quick. So in the real world, I'm pushing now my button, and you can see we are toggling between 0 and 1. Don't forget to leave it at 0 because remember, 0 is managed and 1 is selected, and we want to be in sync in MobiFlight with our simulator for testing purposes. Okay, how we can program now the two modes to change inside the simulator is that we create two additional input lines. So we are currently in the inputs tab, and we select speed managed and speed selected. So we created these two lines, we activated them, and inside speed managed we are choosing our button we want to program, so the FCU push speed button. And now we want to send an event ID to the simulator, which is 68066. And because we are currently inside the managed configuration, we want to set the parameter to 2, which correlates to the managed mode. So because we have now a toggle between 0 and 1 of our own offset, so not the event ID, we want to go into the precondition now and set also the precondition of that. So we have this output precondition, so speed toggle offset, and only when this precondition is met and satisfied, we can actually press, or MobiFlight will execute this command line. If this condition is not met, it will not execute the command line. So because we are currently in the managed configuration, so whenever we want or whenever we press this button, we want to have the managed mode activated, we need to tell MobiFlight whenever the speed toggle offset equals to 1, which means equals to selected mode, then apply this configuration line. Because if we are in managed mode and we want to set the managed mode, it makes no sense. That's why we need to have the precondition here. And we click OK. And the same thing applies for the selected mode. We pick the appropriate button, event ID 68066, and the parameter is 1 for the selected mode. But now in the precondition, we want to have that at 0, because whenever we are in managed mode, we want to toggle the selected mode. Hit apply, press OK, and I will save the configuration file real quick so we're not losing any progress. And I'm going into the outputs to check if everything is running correctly. Click run, and we can see our FSU IPC offset equals to 0, meaning we are in managed mode. The FCU is in managed mode as well. Now I'm pressing the button on my physical FCU, and you can see where the FSU IPC offset is equals to 1, and speed goes into selected mode, and whenever I press it again, speed mode goes into managed mode again. What happens inside the inputs section? You can see here is a exclamation mark, which means that the precondition is not satisfied, meaning it reads the precondition section, and whenever I press the button, you can see the exclamation mark jumps between selected and managed mode. And this is the crucial part about that. Okay, so now we need, in our output section, we want to create, again, 2 states to display on our 7-segment display, meaning we are going to add 2 additional configuration lines. In my case, I will name them speed managed and speed selected again. Activate both. And now we want to display our 7-segment display, our display module, and we are here already here. My 7-segment display is named 7-segment SPD for speed, and I will pick the first 3 because that's how I set it up like this. And I'll test it real quick. Yeah, it shows up. Perfect. Good. So now what we want to display, because we are currently in the managed section, we want to display our value here, meaning this will only go on when the value equals to 0, because remember, speed managed equals, or the managed speed are the 3 dashes, meaning our custom offset equals to 0, meaning is in managed mode. That's why we need to have the precondition equals to 0. Inside the compare tab, we need to add a comparison. So whenever the current value equals to 0, we want to set it on 3 dashes, because we have 3 dashes inside this, the speed section. So we click OK, and inside the selected, we use a preset, and we need to use the preset autopilot airspeed value 07E2. Inside the display, we pick our display we want to show again. Test it real quick. Yep, it works. Perfect. And now in the precondition, you already guessed, we need to set it on 1, because right now we are in selected, and whenever we read in our custom offset 1, we want this display to go on. So whenever this precondition is not met, the display will stay off. So I'll save it real quick, click run again, and you can see now we have a value here, but because the precondition is not met and not satisfied, that means that this display is not going to show and will stay off. And whenever I press my physical button now, this one will go off, and this will, this one will go on, and this one will go off. So we are facing one more issue, which is a not correct value on our 7-segment display. This means that we have to stop the current session, and we have to activate use left padding with zeros, and this will give us the correct value on our 7-segment displays. Okay. So with this, you have successfully managed to display a managed or a selected mode on your physical FCU, and you used only one button to toggle between these states. Okay, so now onto the 2-button setup. So inside the simulator for the 2-button setup, we are starting with our speed toggle offset, same as for the 1-button setup, just to show the value of our own custom FSU IPC offset. And for the inputs side, we need now 2 configuration lines for the push and pull button or function for our FCU, so to toggle between the FSU IPC states. So speed offset, offset managed, and speed offset selected. So these are the 2 states we want to use, and in our managed configuration, because that's how it works, whenever you push into the FCU, you're giving the FCU the managed mode, and whenever you're pulling from the FCU, you are going into the selected mode. That's why the push button, whenever we push it, we are now changing the custom FSU IPC offset, our own offset, but now with a slightly different if statement. So because we want to toggle into the managed mode, we want to check if the value is on selected, in the selected state. And to do so, we are writing a if statement again with the $sign for the current value. If the current value equals to 1, set it to 0, otherwise leave it in 1. As you've learned, whenever MobiFlight starts, it starts in the managed mode, and the managed mode equals to 0 and the selected mode equals to 1. So what we want to check here is either the FSU IPC offset is inside the selected state. If yes, toggle it to the managed mode, otherwise leave it in selected. So to not confuse MobiFlight in our entire configuration, we need now also to define a precondition to enable this if statement here. So we are picking now our custom toggle offset, and we now need to set or to precondition this configuration line with this setting. So whenever the speed toggle offset equals to 1, so meaning whenever we are in the selected mode, then only then this configuration line will apply. And click OK. And the same thing we need to do with the selected button, but this time we want to pull and choose 5300, and once again, if the current value equals to, now the opposite way around, to 0, set it to 1, otherwise leave it at 0. And importantly, to define also the precondition. So whenever we are in managed, only then we want to change into the selected. Hit apply, press OK, we save it just in case, and now we'll test it. So I will hit run, and as you can see, we are now in our pseudo managed mode, and whenever I pull my physical switch, it will change to 1, and whenever I push my physical switch, it will go into 0. And I am not able to toggle with only one button. So that's the prerequisite for the two-button setup, and the rest is the same like with the one-button setup. One thing to note to mention is that the precondition is not satisfied. That's natural because we are checking constantly if the precondition is satisfied or not. So don't get confused by the red exclamation marks. Everything is working fine, as you can see in the output section that we're toggling between these two states. As with for the one button setup, we have now again two configuration lines, speed managed and speed selected. For the managed, we are using the speed push, and we want to change the event ID 68066 to 2, but only when the speed toggle offset equals to 1. So whenever we are in selected, only then we want to change into managed. And the same thing applies for the selected. So whenever we pull the speed button, we want to change 68066 into 1, but this time with the precondition of 0, because we want to change from managed into selected. It's safe. Let's do a quick test. So I'm pulling, we are now into selected, and I'm pushing, we are now back into managed. So this works also. Perfect. Now onto the display of the 7 segments. We are now back in the output, and we'll just call it speed managed and speed selected. Activate both inside the managed. We pick the correct 7-segment display. In the precondition, once again, only if we are in the managed mode, so in 0, only then this display will turn on. And in the comparison tab, whenever we have here a 0, because we are in managed, set it to the 3 dashes. And for the selected, we pick the the autopilot airspeed value. That's correct. Inside the display, we want to choose our 7-segment display for the speed. Don't forget the use left padding here. And for the precondition, now you guessed it, in 1, because we want that to display when we are in selected. So click run, and you can now see whenever I toggle these two states, everything displays correctly. So you have now successfully managed to display the managed and selected modes on your FCU. You can do, or you can use this technique to also configure the heading and the altitude and the vertical speed section. You can use the same principle to display and hide this little dot here. So you're constantly checking what kind of mode is currently active inside your own FSU IPC offset. So whenever the offset is in 0, you know you are in managed, and whenever you are this offset is equals to 1, then you know you are in selected, and from that you can do whatever you wish to do. Okay, one thing I want to show you is how you can identify what kind of event is currently running and currently firing. So whenever you open your FSU IPC console and you change a state, so let's say the heading from managed to selected, you can see now here that the event 68065 changed into parameter 1, and from selected into managed 68065 into parameter 2. So we now know this is the event ID and this is the parameter for use with heading, and the same thing applies for the alt and so on and so forth. One thing to know to mention is that not all events are being displayed in the FSU IPC console log. Only these events which are basically legacy events, they are displayed here. All age variables, for example, or LVARs, HVARs, and so on, they are not displayed in the FSU IPC console log. And lastly, some testing hints. Check if FSU IPC is started and running. Check that MobiFlight is starting and running. What happens to me a lot is that I have started MobiFlight, but I simply forgot to press run, and yeah, that's an issue. Sometimes it's also happening that my previous instance of P3D is still running in the background, so also check your task manager if a former instance of P3D is running and occupying FSU IPC. Then check if your signals are registered inside MobiFlight, so that your wiring is correct and MobiFlight is really registering the signal. You can do that by enabling the debug mode and simply press the button you want to check if the signal is being sent. And lastly, check if you use the correct event ID and the parameters. Sometimes it is easy to forget a parameter or forget the correct value and have a slightly different event ID than expected. So check that and you should be good to go. So that's it. If you have any further questions, comments, or concerns, you can simply come to the MobiFlight community Discord server and ask your questions right away, and we will be gladly assisting you in sorting your things out. So thanks again and have a great day.